So just to announce today's prize. Do we have yesterday's prize winner here? Oh, so he can't comment on the fabulousness of the prize, but today's prize will be for the person who tweets the most. So you Twitterati, you better get tweeting. And there will be a fabulous prize at the end of the day. How is everyone feeling after yesterday's meetings and last night? How are you feeling? Atta's feeling fabulous, got some fabulous feeling. Okay, it's one of the dangers of Facebook, you know, is quite a lot of people went and had fun last night, I saw this morning. However, we have work to be done today, so I'll just come and take seats, come. But we'll get started in the interests of keeping our time. So, this morning, I was up at 4:30, as you are when you're a bit jet-lagged. And I was thinking a little bit about what came out of yesterday's discussions. I was also reading the newspaper, and I saw there was a headline that announced that Oxfam had just published a report which said that the 4 richest men in Indonesia, and they are all men, their net worth is equal to the 100 million poorest in Indonesia. So I think some of the issues around sort of structural inequalities that came out yesterday are very relevant in the news right now, as is the kind of news coming out of America, the United States. Trump has rescinded various rights for transgender. So, you know, there's serious stuff at play here. So some of the things that remained with me yesterday were there were some very high-level reflections about the quality and nature of our work in philanthropy. I think the point was made that in yesterday's session around the corporate sector and engaging with corporations was that philanthropy and civil society, we do not have the monopoly on virtue. And sometimes we do pat ourselves on the back a little bit too much and look at other sectors perhaps in less generous terms than we see ourselves. I think this idea of intersectionality, which Kumi raised yesterday, and the role of networks such as Wings and the networks that you represent in building those spaces for different actors to come together and to engage. I think there were some questions about whether our systems were fit for purpose. The log frame, the beloved log frame, was mentioned a number of times. Are we spending our time on the right things? And are we asking our partners to be spending time on the right things? And there was a session yesterday on looking at community philanthropy and a question of how do we make the case, how do we grow cultures of giving? So if we're looking at giving as something is not just the repository of the wealthy, how do we grow cultures of giving without taking governments off the hook? But how do we grow cultures of giving as a way of growing citizen activism, participation, that giving becomes a political act, an act of engagement, rather than a substitution for the failures of governments. And then there was just some real nitty-gritty challenges. Somebody in a session yesterday was saying, look, we know social change takes time, but we can't get our donors. Our donors always know best. Our local donors just know best. And so I come to something like this, it's great, and then I have to go back and have the same conversations. I just came from the session on looking at emerging markets philanthropy organized by the Philanthropy for Social Justice and Peace Network. And there, someone from Brazil said, look, you know, let's face it, in Brazil, most people still haven't heard of philanthropy. So you come to an event like this, the network of networks, and I go back home and people still don't get it or see a value for it. So I think these are questions, it's sort of that mixture of high level and very practical, and the role of networks in all of this, that are very much current in our conversations here. I'm going to ask Benjamin to come on. As you know, Benjamin is the new Executive Director of Wings, and he's going to come and make a couple of reflections on the conversations yesterday. But while he's doing that, I would like a couple of people from the audience to make their contributions. So what were you left with yesterday? What did you take home last night? What did you wake up this morning thinking about yesterday's conversation? So we'll take just a couple of comments from the audience, but first, Benjamin, how are you feeling?
Thank you, Jenny. Well, I'm feeling good. Actually, I'm feeling really, really good. Recently a colleague told me, oh, now that you joined the network of Wings, in a way you are on top of the global philanthropy pyramid. So you're laughing, why? And I told them, yes, you're right. We're on top of the philanthropic pyramid, especially here in Mexico. But unfortunately for me, but I should say fortunately, actually, it's a reverse pyramid. And I think this network is a kind of anchorage point. It's a hub that connects and supports those who support, those who support, those who support, communities and social leaders throughout the world that are working for social good and for change. And so it's very interesting to be part of this invisible, kind of hidden part of the iceberg that makes the work on the ground that is visible stronger, more efficient, and more sustainable. So it's and if I can spin the metaphor, I would even say that if this infrastructure, if this hidden part is strong enough, if it's interconnected enough, if it's also enough open to other sectors, and we discussed about alliances and intersectionality yesterday, it's also an iceberg that can resist the current negative currents that are trying to diminish, to restrict, and sometimes to annihilate the work that is being done to achieve social change and social good. It's very interesting to be part of this hidden part of the iceberg, and also to have with this Wings Forum, and it's really literally the case right now, the spotlights turn on this hidden part and the work that is doing as invisible but crucial part of civil society. So it feels very good, and it feels good also to see that it's not only a network and names and organizations, but that it's actually people that share common values and objectives. So I can experience that really concretely since yesterday, and it's a very wonderful experience.
Great. Comments, any thoughts from yesterday from the audience? We have a microphone roving. Yes, ma'am, would you introduce yourself as well, please?
Hi, I am Sandra Richardson, part of the Canadian contingent from Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And I think the session that I really enjoyed yesterday was the one on fact and myth. So they had the little audience responders on the table, and the question would come up, and you immediately went to, oh, that's a myth. And the score came up. And then the discussion with the panelists, which really emphasized, maybe we jump or presume. And it was the interaction with the audience and also with the panelists. So I think what I took away from that is, question everything a bit more, even this. Thank you.
Thank you. That we all carry our own theories of change where we know immediately, are loaded with assumptions. No, it was very effective in that sense. Thank you. Anyone else? Quick thoughts from yesterday? No thoughts? Oh, Janet. And Janet, introduce yourself. Oh, well, you've spoken, we know who you are, but you should still introduce yourself.
I'm Janet from KCDF. Anyway, yeah. I found the idea that Wings, and by extension most of our networks, if not all our networks, are about building bridges, something that was very inspiring. And actually that's from Maria. And especially now when by extension we took it to the idea of how we work with governments, how we work with individuals, high net worth corporates. You know, the idea of building bridges, I think, can take us far.
So sort of rich, deep, thick networks. One more. Is there one more comment from on yesterday? Yes.
James McGowan from Daphne. The most enlightening session for me was the last one of the day yesterday, the not business as usual. I think it builds on the last point of the bridges and who we might connect with, and for me it was a real eye-opener to think of going beyond the traditional philanthropic field and look to relationships that could be developed with the private sector in different ways.
Right, it's not conversations one normally has or in one's day job. I agree, I think it was very good. James, by the way, if you didn't recognize him, he was our Grim Reaper from yesterday, so I'm pleased to announce that he is well and alive again. All right, that's it from me. I'm going to hand over for Benjamin, who's going to kick off the rest of the morning.
Thank you very much. So I will very briefly introduce the Imagine Award, the Imagine Prize. So this award, this prize, takes its name from the original meeting that is the ancestor of the Wings Forum, and that also is the ancestor of Wings Network. It's the international meeting of associations serving grantmakers that we, I think, mentioned already, and that was held in 1998 here in Oaxaca in Mexico. And since this period, the network has grown, and the whole field, and we saw it also yesterday when presenting the results of the last report on infrastructure. So this sector has been developing, has been growing, and in 2014, Wings has decided to create this Imagine Prize to honor and recognize long-term commitment to global philanthropy. And so in 2014, recognizing the pioneering work of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation in developing civil society and philanthropy in countries that were transitioning out of civil war and of repression, especially community-led philanthropy. It was a natural choice to have Bill White, the retiring president at that time and CEO of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, be the first recipient of the award. And so this year, as you will see, the theme of this award is the question of the enabling environment for civil society and philanthropy. And as you can see in the programs, and as you have already started to experience it yesterday, it's a very critical issue, and it's a key issue throughout this forum and for all of you, because most of you are involved on these issues, and so it's very important to take time to look at the achievements that have been also done in this sector, and so I will simply now invite Nick Deshaikivsky from the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Program Officer, to come on stage and present this year's awardee of the Imagine Prize. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you. Pardon, I'm going to use the podium. I'm not yet a TED Talk person. But it is truly a privilege, an honor, and a great pleasure to be introducing Douglas Rutzen, the President and CEO of the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, as the winner of the 2017 Imagine Award. On two fronts. First, as a representative of the Mott Foundation, as you know, we're a supporter of philanthropy infrastructure, but why? It's because we care deeply about civil society, about people having the possibilities to work together for their own benefit and for improving lives in their communities. And the way we do that is we try to find organizations and people that really can make a difference and have a vision and practical solutions and can move forward to support civil society. When it comes to ICNL, I'm not sure who found who, but somewhere back in the 1990s, our foundation and ICNL started working together. And, you know, we often have hyperbole in our philanthropy discourse. Everything is transformational and critical and essential and key. But in the case of ICNL, those words really do apply, and in the case of Doug as well. Starting with work on country notes, or that they would work with the Council on Foundations in the United States that provided the picture of what laws in various countries are like that can help U.S. foundations or givers give abroad, to providing a lot of advice, technical assistance, and support, education on the legal framework and regulatory framework that's necessary to help support civil society and philanthropy. On a personal level, let me talk about Doug as a person for a bit. Here's a few things you may not know. He got started in this back in 1989, found himself in Prague speaking to some students who were involved in the Velvet Revolution. They invited him to teach at law school there. I don't know, you must have been about 12 years old, Doug, when that happened. And two of those students got elected to the Czechoslovak parliament, and later they asked him to serve as a legal advisor, which he did. And his first assignment was to help draft the legislation for civil society and for philanthropy there, for nonprofits. And this was at a time that the term civil society was not in vogue like it is today, where nonprofits was a poorly understood concept, particularly in Czechoslovakia or in other countries of the region, and indeed in many places around the world. But because of that work, Doug was then often asked to provide advice in lots of places around the world, and he was rapidly developing expertise on that. So he joined ICNL in 1994. He's been the president and CEO for, I think, about the past 12 years of that organization. But what that indicated, though, back in the 90s when Doug was involved, or at the beginning, is a lot of foresight and vision. And that was a time when, you know, the thread was developing things so things can happen. And right now we're seeing, trying to, in many places of the world, the necessity to say, whoa, you know, they're trying to close that space. What can we do to push back and keep it open? Doug saw this back a while ago, okay, when a lot of us weren't thinking that way. There was an Alliance article in 2006 where he was talking about, wait a minute, Lester Salomon talked about an associational revolution. The associational counter-revolution is happening. Besides forward thinking, Doug evidences a lot of expansive thinking. I find that in conversations with them, but consider that having a UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of association and freedom of assembly, that was Doug's idea, okay? But it's not just having the ideas. Doug evidences perseverance because he organized an advocacy campaign and worked to make that happen. Another example of his perseverance is the fact that he saw through the case against Libya on the Lockerbie bombing. And as Doug relayed to me, that at one point that he was being told, forget it, that it ain't gonna happen, that there's not much here, and he stuck to it, and eventually that settlement did happen. So it's not for naught that he was asked that he is the co-chair of the civil society pillar in the community of democracies, that President Obama had invited him to speak on a panel about civil society with other heads of state at the 2013 UN General Assembly. It's not for naught that Doug has been several times named one of the top 50 influential people in the nonprofit sector in the United States by the Nonprofit Times. It's not for naught that the MacArthur Foundation awarded one of its Genius Grants for Organizations to ICNL recently, a $1 million award. Doug is an outstanding leader. ICNL has grown, and it's staffed with many highly professional people with the highest degree of integrity and that are dedicated to their work. They're well respected, and I know that Doug has a lot to do with that as the leader. If you speak with Doug in a little bit of time, you will kind of realize that this guy is actually brilliant. And so I also thought, why is he doing this? Because he could go to Wall Street and be making millions of dollars as a corporate lawyer. I'm sure of that. And yet, Doug cares deeply about civil society. He's a warm and caring individual. And in fact, one of the things I like about him when we talk every so often, we get together at conferences, is he starts out with the question, how's your family? He reminds me what's the most important thing in life. Doug is also a humble person. Last night he said, you know, you can roast me, but I couldn't think of what to roast him about. Except maybe, Doug, I actually wonder if you really are a lawyer. Because my experience with lawyers is usually when I start talking to them, I get lost after a while with all the jargon and legalese. And when I speak to Doug, there's a person speaking in very understandable, normal American English. And so I don't know. You'll have to prove to me that you actually are a lawyer, Doug. But anyway, I'd like to thank you for listening to that. But please, I'd like to introduce Doug Rutzen. Come to stage for a presentation. To my friend and colleague, in recognition of his global leadership in promoting the independence and accountability of the philanthropy sector, Doug, you are awarded the Imagine Prize from Wings.
Wow, that was embarrassing. That was the kind of introduction that would make my dad proud and my mom would have actually believed. It's an honor to be here. I thank Wings. I thank the Wings board. I thank each and every one of you. As I look out in this audience, I see so many old friends. I see so many new friends. And I see so many friends that I want to make. Because I consider this to be a shared award. It's recognition of the community that is fighting to safeguard civic space and civic freedom around the world. It's recognition of our staff. It's recognition of our board. I see Barbara here. We have an exceptional board. Barbara is a member, and they let me make presentations like the one I'm about to make, which might be a little bit political. But that's the point. I don't like to talk about me. I don't like to talk about ICNL. I like to talk about the state of affairs in the world today. In 1974, George Steiner wrote a book called Nostalgia for the Absolute. His premise is that people are attracted to simple theories that sweep away complexity and confusion. Consider mythology. I will try to make this smooth. Through Zeus and Poseidon, Ares and Athena, the ancient Greeks could explain thunder and lightning, war and peace. This mythology was attractive because it provided a very simple explanation to very complex phenomena. The same attributes make populism appealing. Consider the 1920s and the 1930s. Democracies had gone through economic depression. People felt that their conservative values were being attacked. And we found political leaders who were filling this void with populist theories that will forever stain the pages of human history. I'm reminded of Steiner's book as I consider the world today. In many countries, there's a crisis of confidence in democracy. The public in many countries seems more inclined towards authoritarianism. Here's a stunning statistic I found from the United States. It's from the World Values Survey. In 1995, they asked people, would you support military rule in the United States? In 1995, 1 out of 16 said yes. 2015, 1 out of 6 said yes. And of course, politicians are riding this wave of populism to electoral victory. At ICNL, we work in 100 countries, and we do believe that there's a populist playbook. What are the chapters in that playbook? First, identify a segment of society that feels angry and aggrieved, perhaps because they've lost jobs, or perhaps because they consider their traditional values to be threatened. Second, find an enemy. Maybe it's Muslims, maybe it's migrants, maybe it's Gulenists in Turkey, maybe it's the Jewish philanthropist George Soros. You need to find a scapegoat. Why? Because you can cultivate almost a tribal instinct of us versus them, the politics of identity. Third, offer the promise of a better future if only you believe. This is a difficult, somewhat grainy image, but it's actually a newspaper article from 1934. We found it online with the highlighting already in place. It's an article about Adolf Hitler. If you can read the highlighted section, he told the people of Germany he would make Germany great again. Fourth, tap into emotions. Indeed, try to tap into that instinctual notion of survival, telling people that they have a right to place their interests first, to put their tribe ahead of others. Of course, this is the antithesis of philanthropy, because what do? We try to put the other first. But this is a very, very powerful message. And look, what does America first mean for the world? Here's a quote from Hungary, where Orban says, thanks to Trump, we got permission from the highest place in the world that we too are free to place ourselves first as well. Now, for those of us who studied high school or college economics, we know where this leads. We know about the tragedy of the commons. It may seem perfectly rational to act out of self-interest. It might seem perfectly rational to withdraw from a climate agreement because you don't disadvantage your national industries. But by doing so, we destroy the commons. As Kumi said, we don't destroy the world, we destroy ourselves. Or it might seem perfectly rational to withdraw or renegotiate trade agreements or to impose tariffs. And we know where that leads as well, because we did that in the United States in 1930. It was called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. What did that lead to? Increased unemployment in the United States, the collapse of the global economy, and World War II. So going back to where I began, Steiner's point is that populists don't want to hear about the ramifications and facts around their policies. Why? Because they're popular, specifically because they provide a simple explanation to a complex world. As a result, populists tend to reject dissent. They say, you're on our side or you're the enemy. Here's a tweet just from the 17th, where the news is considered not the enemy of a particular individual or politician, but an enemy of the American people. They also use the law to restrict the media. Today, we talk about internet restrictions, but think about the technology of the 16th century to spread communications. It was Gutenberg's printing press. And in 1534, King Henry VIII banned the import of any books that were printed on the continent using this new information technology. So it's a time-tested technique to restrict the freedom of expression. As President Obama once said, countries and governments that don't listen to their people will hear from them on the street. And again, we see the law being used as a tool of choice to restrict peaceful assemblies. It goes back in history. I tried to find the first example of the law being used to limit dissent. The first I could find was the Trial of Socrates. What was he tried for? For assembling with students in the Athenian Agora and challenging what I said at the beginning, the strength and power of Greek gods. We see this playing out in other countries as well. In the United States, we're now tracking 11 states that are preemptively trying to put in place laws that will restrict peaceful demonstrations in the United States. And finally, restrictions on civil society and philanthropy. Since 2012, we've been tracking these trends, and we see 161 restrictive initiatives considered or enacted in countries around the world. I don't want to leave you just with a depressing note. I go to these meetings and people diagnose the problem and they don't talk about possible solutions. So on a lighter note, I remember the famous philosopher Pogo the Possum. He's the guy who, during the height of McCarthyism, has the famous quote, "We have seen the enemy and he is us." The second quote, which he's well known for, is we're confronted with insurmountable opportunity, that in fact there are enormous opportunities if only we try. So what are some of these opportunities? First, when you go to a global conference, we have a bit of a tendency to focus on what we have in common. We then develop common action plans. Makes sense, but that obscures that what we have in common may not be what's important at a country level. It may not be the activities most likely to produce change. If you want to, for example, protect civic space in the United States, protect marginalized groups, or protect the environment, we might opt for a litigation strategy, and you see that playing out today in the US. But I was talking to Başak when I arrived. This is not a strategy you could use in, for example, Turkey. Or when we talk about challenges in Hungary, there's EU advocacy that's probably going to be persuasive there, but will have no impact, as Masha told me, in a place like Russia. Accordingly, the first step is to focus on country strategies. You don't have to raise your hand, but think about it. How many organizations in this room have been involved in developing a country strategy to address issues of civic space or populism? I think we need to start there. Only then can we turn to the second issue, which is commonalities and ways that we can work together. Third, we do need to be careful with our narratives, because as we see populists try to play into this notion of identity, us versus them. And I think this is quite interesting because if you think about it, we often use their very language. How many times at this conference have we heard the term foreign funding? Foreign, the other. The other is funding in our country. But if you think of the Hilton Hotel or Turkish Airlines or Google, we don't call them foreign funded companies. We hold them on a pedestal. They're multinational, they're international. We consider them to be on a different plane. So I think we need to be very careful and focus on our narratives and our language so we don't use the language of governments that seek to control us. Now, fourth, some groups might say, yeah, but this isn't about us. I get this point about social justice, but my board won't support it. It's not in my mandate. What I would tell you is please think of a way to integrate issues of social justice into your activities. This is a headline just from last week where museums and libraries fought the issue of fake news and alternative facts with a day of facts. Or from Europe, museums that are using their exhibitions to address the issue of the politics of identity. In fact, I think there's many things we can do to integrate and mainstream this counter-narrative and the issue of civic space into every organization in this room. And I think it'd be interesting for Wings to consider preparing some research on the issue of philanthropy and civil society and what we can do during an era of populism. And finally, if you're a campaigner, please join us because there's simply so much to do. We have to reach out beyond traditional NGOs. We have to embrace trade unions and social movements and faith-based organizations. We need to reach out to other sectors, unusual allies. We find in many countries the media is under attack, the judiciary is under attack. Even businesses are complaining about interventionist governments that's telling them, you cannot move your factory to another country. You must stay put, and we will interfere with free market decisions. So we need to focus on sectoral alliances and building a movement. We also can't just focus on society's elite. We need to engage with the person on the street. So we need civic education, yes, but I would also say there's a role for philanthropy in creating safe spaces for dialogue at a community level. In many countries, it's very hard to have a non-polarized discussion, and sometimes we don't actually understand the concern of the other. We need those safe spaces for dialogue. So in conclusion, as we look around the world, I think that we're in the midst of a historic struggle over civil society, philanthropic freedom, and in fact, democracy. Cornerstone concepts are being discussed, debated, and at times violently contested. But let us not be passive observers while history is being made by others. Instead, through meetings like this, let's reach out, let's gain inspiration and strength from one another, and then let's reach up, and together, let's bend that proverbial arc of history towards justice, dignity, and freedom. We shall succeed, but we'll only do it together. Thank you.
Wow, I've got the chills. That was fantastic, Doug. Thank you. That was exactly what we needed to wake us up and energize us as we continue our way through Wings Forum. Wonderful, wonderful.